I have been waiting on the Steam Deck since I submitted my pre-order back in June this year. When it arrived, it would be my very first PC handheld that I ever owned. However, during that time span, which stretched across several months, Ayaneo reaches out, and before I know it, the Ayaneo Air Pro is on my doorstep, effectively intercepting the honor as my first PC handheld device. With the Air Pro in hand to take my mind off the weight, it really begins to grow on me. But then in late September, the Steam Deck arrives, and things become very interesting. For this video, we'll do a deep dive on Valve's top-of-the-line Steam Deck versus the Ayaneo Air Pro Ryzen 7 5825U. We'll get into the hardware, performance assessments, OS capabilities and limitations, and we'll even get into direct comparisons with the most popular handheld console in modern-day gaming, the Nintendo Switch. So step inside and pull the curtain behind you. These are the confessions of a non-PC gamer, coming from console into the world of handheld PC gaming. My handheld starting point was the Switch OLED, so I cannot believe the miniature size of the Ayaneo Air Pro. It's nearly the same width as the Switch OLED console with the Joy-Cons removed. As with the Switch, the Air Pro features a beautiful OLED display. However, it has a max brightness of 350 nits, and the Air Pro has a resolution of 1920 by 1080p versus 720p on the Switch. Comparatively, the Steam Deck slams a beer on the table and starts taking names where sheer size is concerned. However, compared to the Switch and the Air Pro, the deck features an underwhelming IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1280 by 800p at 60 Hz, but it does get the brightest of the three with a max brightness of 400 nits. The deck and the Air Pro have very similar exhaust and intake cooling systems, with air drawing in from the back and expelling up from the top between the triggers and shoulder buttons. The cooling systems for each device perform their job very well, though the deck will make considerably more noise during the cooling process. However, the deck internal speakers are superiorly engineered and are fundamentally louder and have more presence than the Air Pro. So much of the humming that the deck fans will kick out can potentially be muted if you really start to crank up the volume. The speakers on the Air Pro are passable at best, as the speakers fire downward and the overall soundstage is incredibly shallow. Side by side, the deck uses an AMD APU processor with a Zen 2 4-core CPU as compared to the AMD Ryzen 7 5825U and Zen 3 8-core CPU on the Air Pro. GPU-wise, the deck uses an RDNA 2 versus the dated Vega 8 GPU engineered inside the Air Pro. Both handhelds feature 16 GB of onboard RAM, but the deck maxes out at 512 GB SSD internal storage, while this particular Air Pro model features a 1 TB SSD. As for the battery, the Ayaneo Air Pro comes equipped with a 38 Wh battery versus the 40 Wh battery on the deck, which is a great improvement for the Air Pro over the original model. But for the deck, I would have liked to see more than a 2 Wh battery advantage over the Air Pro, given the size disparity. So even though the Air Pro battery is technically behind the Steam Deck, I would actually give the edge to the Air Pro for the rivaling 38 Wh battery in such a small form factor. When it comes to the overall build quality, D-pad, face buttons, analog sticks, shoulder, trigger buttons, etc., neither feel cheap or insubstantial. Both units have a high quality build, but I'd say that the deck comes closest to mimicking the feel of a traditional console controller due to the beefier grips that feel a lot more like the Switch when the Satisfy grip is attached. And the fact that the deck triggers sit much lower than the shoulder buttons also lends itself towards the console feel, because the Ayaneo Air Pro triggers are virtually even in height with the shoulder buttons in front of them. While this configuration doesn't feel uncomfortable, it just feels more foreign than what I've become accustomed to. While this next point is certainly subjective, I actually prefer the symmetrical analog stick configuration on the deck versus the Air Pro or the Switch Joy-Cons, because the parallel stick alignment on the deck comes closest to the DualSense, which I personally find to be the most comfortable console controller that I've used to date. When it comes to rumble, the deck rumble technology is leagues ahead of the Air Pro, because the Air Pro rumble is honestly more buzzy and noisy than anything else. Comparatively, the deck rumble produces little to no noise at all, and it feels like there's a greater sense of precision and directional movement. The magnetic Hall analog sticks are obviously a hot buzzword for Ayaneo PC handhelds, given that stick drift should be non-existent, which does give me added peace of mind. But my favorite external feature for the Air Pro so far has been the fingerprint recognition power button. I don't like keying in passwords every time I sleep my device, so this feature has been a real game changer. I think I would have fallen more in love with the Hall joysticks as well if they were a bit more raised and had a little more travel to them, something that the Steam Deck sticks definitely provide. But hands down, after fighting with the Aya digital trackpad and desktop, I find that the dual physical trackpads on the Deck are nothing short of spectacular. They're highly customizable, and I just find the haptic feedback so satisfying. Remapping the left trackpad to allow for scrolling through items in desktop, and even using the back buttons to jump back and forward in a browser makes for a very impressive browsing experience, coming only behind that of using a dedicated physical mouse and keyboard. On the other hand, 2 USB-C ports engineered in the Air Pro is a major advantage over the Deck. Hardware aside, there are 2 major things that separate the Deck in the Ayaneo Air Pro. Number 1 is that the Air Pro uses Windows 11 operating system, while the Deck uses Steam, aka Linux OS. For now at least, because Ayaneo does have plans to release their own Linux-based OS integration in the future. And the second thing that separates these 2 handhelds is that the Deck leverages the well-established Steam storefront as the native UI game launcher, while Ayaneo utilizes their own proprietary game launcher user interface known as Aya Space, which is designed to pull in your game content from other digital storefronts such as Steam, GOG, and Epic Games. Because Ayaneo doesn't operate their own digital storefront, however, the company is unable to match the superior cost to performance value that Valve is able to provide, which is the reason Ayaneo handhelds tend to be on the higher end as compared to the Deck. Nevertheless, this is a huge win from a consumer standpoint regardless, but the convenience of the Steam native UI, storefront, and operating system does come at a bit of a cost when you consider that Windows has pretty much dominated the PC gaming space from the very beginning. This is something that I especially felt after opening a Steam account on the Ayaneo Air Pro and making some initial purchases before logging back into that account on the Steam Deck when it finally arrived. There was now a Steam Deck compatibility checklist that I needed to at the very least glance over prior to making purchases. Or, to be on the safe side, I could simply live in the Great on the Deck tab to ensure that games that I buy will run well on the Steam Deck. Well, it just so happened that I had already purchased the Batman Arkham Knight 3-game bundle during a sale on the Ayaneo Air Pro before the Deck came in, and it turned out that only one of those games are officially verified to run well on the Deck, that being Arkham Knight City. Initially, I panicked after realizing this and rushed out and got a refund on the Arkham bundle, which looking back now, I regret, because that sale has since passed, and I'm realizing that a lot of games without that green certified checkmark run just fine on the Deck. And considering just how fast the Deck compatibility game list is growing, with over 6,000 titles to date rated verified or playable, it's honestly just a matter of time before the Windows to Linux compatibility issues are little more than a minor inconvenience. And of course, you can install Windows 10 or 11 on the Deck if push comes to shove, which is something that I have considered, though I honestly didn't buy a Linux-based handheld with the explicit goal of turning it into a Windows PC, because I really like the idea of gaming on an open-sourced, non-wall-guarded operating system that the Steam OS represents. Usership is rapidly growing, and I think the fact that Ayaneo now wants to throw their hat in the ring as well really speaks positively to the future of Linux PC gaming overall. Another thing that makes me a little hesitant to install Windows on the Deck is how frustrated I become with jumping through hoops on Windows 11 on the Air Pro during the initial setup. Windows 11 had even crashed on me during the first boot up after attempting to install the latest version. It sat on a black install screen for hours until I finally had enough and performed a hard reset. But that's a good segue into my overall user experience with the Ayaneo UI. After some tinkering in the very beginning, the user experience really was quite seamless. That is, until it came time to create an Aya Space account, which kept throwing login criteria in my email junk box. But once that was all set, I could either launch games directly with the Steam launcher in either windowed or big picture mode, or I can head over into the very aesthetically pleasing Aya Space UI that features brilliant illustrations and animations that really pop with this 1080p OLED display. From here, you can launch and play any sync game directly, where you can take advantage of features such as regulating TDP, adjusting resolution, viewing usage status metrics, customizing Joy-Con RGB colors and effects, and so much more. I will say that the biggest issue so far with Aya Space is that it often doesn't sync a new game purchase on the back end automatically, causing me to have to go in manually to add it in. But overall, from a compatibility standpoint, When comparing the Ayaneo Air Pro to the Steam Deck, pretty much every PC game in existence is going to run well on the Windows Air Pro right out of the gates, which we know the same cannot be said for the deck. And another big advantage for the Air Pro over the deck is how it interacts with Xbox Game Pass for PC. The Xbox Game Launcher for PC can be installed natively, and you are not limited to the Xbox Cloud Game Library as you are on the deck. You can physically install any Game Pass game on the device itself and play it locally for a superior gaming experience. I've tried Game Pass Cloud Gaming on the deck, and while it's certainly a welcomed option to have, nothing beats local gaming. If and when the day comes that SteamOS is also able to support Game Pass for local play, I think it'll be even more impactful for deck versus Aya gamers because you can potentially play unsupported deck games on SteamOS locally if that game happens to be available on the Game Pass library. Switching gears over to my deck Steam UI experience. Truth is, I find it more intuitive and user-friendly than Aya Space or Steam Big Picture mode on the Air Pro. I think the Steam Deck Game Launcher, which boots up by default every time you power on the device, comes closest to mimicking a true console UI experience. I really like the way the game launcher and the desktop operate independently of each other, whereas on the Ayaneo, the game launcher essentially runs on top of the desktop interface itself. And I'm a huge fan of the quick settings menu toggle, where I can monitor battery life, regulate TDP, tweak GPU and FPS settings, and so much more. It's the equivalent of the ISpace performance adjustment tools, except you can access them very quickly on the fly while in game. Holding down the ISpace button will pull up a quick menu as well, but it only allows for more top-line adjustments. My personal favorite deck feature right now, though, has to be the performance overlay tool that eliminates the need for third-party overlay software, as you're seeing right here for the Air Pro. When it comes to navigating desktop, without question, the Deck Dual Trackpad is a significant improvement over the digital trackpad option for the Air Pro. I do feel the left trackpad should have scroll functionality right out of the box though, so you're not forced to grab and drag scroll bars, which is very awkward without a traditional mouse. And I think the default keyboard launcher should have a simpler toggle option versus pressing the Steam and X button simultaneously, especially considering that the keyboard is not automatically triggered when you tap inside a search box. Though to be fair, the Ayaneo Air Pro doesn't automatically trigger the keyboard either in this scenario, but tapping the LC button is a much more efficient option versus Steam plus X. It's also worth noting that the deck will automatically pull up the keyboard when you tap inside search boxes inside the game launcher versus desktop. In the interest of time, I pulled just 3 AAA titles to run benchmarks for the initial review: Cyberpunk 2077, Control Ultimate, and God of War. Kicking things off with Cyberpunk 2077 at a 15-watt TDP on the deck, graphics high, frames hovered around the high 20s, low 30s FPS, rarely ever dropping below 25. GPU generally sat around 98-99%. However, the deck's Zen 2 4-core CPU usage, a number you generally want on the lower end, did run relatively high in the mid-70s, in some cases even tiptoeing into the 80s as compared to the Ayaneo Air Pro Zen 3 8-core CPU, which never exceeded 41% in CPU usage. However, at a 15-watt TDP, the Air Pro struggled to even maintain a 20 FPS minimum, sitting primarily in the high teens for the majority of the test. Pushing the thermals to the very limits on the Air Pro to a TDP of 18 watts, 3 watts above the deck's 15-watt cap, I was able to finally venture into 20 FPS, though I was never able to exceed 25 FPS, while the deck at 15 watts rarely ever dropped below this benchmark. At a TDP of 12 watts, results were relatively the same, with a moderate drop in FPS across the board. This time around, the Air Pro fought to exceed 18 FPS, while the deck easily exceeded 25. At a 12 and 15 watt TDP on medium graphical settings, the deck easily maintained 30 FPS and often ventured into the 40s on the higher wattage side, while the Air Pro hovered in the high 20s at 15 watts and low to mid 20s at 12. It was again the case for Control Ultimate that the Air Pro CPU ran more efficiently, never exceeding 26% in usage, while the deck fought to maintain CPU usage below 30% at 15 watts and 20% at 12. God of War graphics high. I was able to get awfully close to 30 FPS on the deck with a TDP of 15 watts, while I remained in the high teens, low 20s on the Air Pro at 15 watt TDP, 12 watts, low 20s on the deck, and high teens on the Air Pro. Surprisingly, I did notice a significant boost in frames on the Air Pro from pushing TDP to the max of 18 watts. FPS still hovered in the high teens, low 20 FPS realm. This is pretty hard to watch, but I want to illustrate the 8 watt performance on the Air Pro. God of War literally becomes a slideshow. However, to my surprise, while performance is clearly hampered at 8 watts, the deck somehow manages to remain in the high teens. Now obviously, you can boost FPS much higher by dropping resolution and in-game graphics even further, but I wanted to push these systems a bit more, and I don't really see myself dropping resolution below 720p, because at that point, that would be even lower than the Switch. I knew that the deck's 8 RDNA GPU had an advantage over the Air Pro Vega 8 graphics going in, but I didn't imagine that it would come out looking this superior, which is why I'd really love to get my hands on the recently announced Ayaneo Air 2 with Ryzen 7 6800U processor and Radeon 680M graphics, because this new Ayaneo model could very well be the proper PC handheld rival the Steam Deck truly needs. Though the Steam Deck's 1280 by 800p LCD display is by every measure a significant downgrade versus the vibrant 1920 by 1080p OLED display on the Air Pro, I'm almost ashamed to admit that I've enjoyed gaming in handheld on the deck far more than I have on the Ayaneo Air Pro, and this pains me to say after such a strong romance with this PC handheld device when it was all I knew. Secretly, I wanted to discover that the performance between the deck and the Air Pro was marginal enough to the point where I could still crown the Air Pro in favor of the crisp inky OLED display. How dare you choose IPS 800p over an OLED 1080p? That's blasphemy. But then it dawned on me, in order to even come close to deck performance, I would have to run my AAA games at 720p or lower on the Air Pro anyway, essentially rendering the higher resolution useless. That realization, on top of the fact that I simply find the deck's ergonomics more comfortable, and that I don't have to squint nearly as much on the 7-inch display versus the 5.5-inch display on the Air Pro, is what began to turn the tides for me. For shooters, I often found myself hunting for the crosshair on the Air Pro display depending on the lighting, and in-game text, menus, and HUDs, in some cases, can feel like a serious chore. Maybe the Switch 7-inch display I started out with has simply spoiled me, because jumping in between the deck, the Switch OLED, and back to the Air Pro just leaves so much to be desired from a screen real estate standpoint. But it's amazing how much of a difference 1.5 inches can make when it comes to a handheld and the user experience. If only the Air Pro had taken advantage of the thick bezels, because it could easily be a 6-inch display at minimum. But nevertheless, it's not every day that you can say that you game on a handheld PC with a 1080p OLED display, regardless of the screen size, because that is truly an anomaly in the space. I don't think any other PC handheld at the moment can make this claim. Not even the new upcoming Ayaneo 2 will have an OLED display. So that's something that makes this specific model quite unique. And not to mention the Air Pro's superior Zen 2 CPU versus the Zen 2 on the Steam Deck, dual USB-C chargers versus one on the deck, fingerprint reader versus none on the deck, and the 38 watt-hour battery versus 40 watt-hour battery at nearly half the size. So no, regardless of any gripes, the Ayaneo Air Pro is no slouch. But when stacked against the deck, it does leave quite a bit to be desired considering the price disparity. Because the fact of the matter is you could literally buy this and the base model of this for virtually the same cost as this. But even in spite of this truth, I truly do believe that there's an end user for the Ayaneo Air Pro. This will be an individual who is less concerned with large open worlds or FPS shooters with graphically demanding textures. If you're looking for something to crush 2D games, retro backlogs, or even throwback AAA titles, the Ayaneo Air Pro will pass with flying colors, and the vibrant screen and the inky blacks will not disappoint. Switching gears back to the deck, while I've been very impressed with the graphical power, build quality, ergonomics, and fairly stable frame rates, the screen resolution is my biggest complaint. With a 1280 by 800p display, the deck only has 80 more pixels than the original Nintendo Switch, which was released 6 years ago. Being that Valve made the decision to go IPS versus OLED, it would have been great to see some of those savings go towards a higher resolution panel. And man, has the 2 USB-C ports and the fingerprint reader on the Air Pro spoiled me. But if you're going straight into the deck, you can't miss something that you never had. My only other gripe for the deck would be the overall fan noise when playing more demanding titles. But to Valve's credit, they have continuously tweaked the software to improve efficiency and noise output, in addition to pumping out protons and expanding deck compatibility at an insanely fast rate, which really shows their commitment to the product and their receptiveness to customer feedback. I'll say, if you're coming from a traditional console to the world of handheld PC, as I am, don't expect to pick up either of these two devices when they arrive and immediately start playing games. Configurations, installations, and tweaking will be in order. There's a lot less hand-holding in this space, and the learning curve can be steep, depending on how you want to use the device. Emulation is undoubtedly my next conquest, and I'll probably start with PS3, considering the software limitations on the PlayStation Premium service. In conclusion, as a predominant console gamer for many years, I have to confess that the Steam Deck and the Ayaneo Air Pro have really helped to ease the transition from console to PC in a way that I never would have thought possible, providing much more user-friendly, console-like user interfaces, while maintaining the greater level of control and customization capabilities that gaming PCs are known for, such as the ability to use virtually any modern console controller, software mods, and emulation flexibility, to name a few. And it's a real luxury to be able to jump in and play new indie titles versus waiting and hoping they're eventually ported over to console. Before you jet, drop your top 5 PC titles for handheld gaming. And while you're at it, drop me a few recommendations that play well on SteamOS. And of course, are you currently using your PC handheld for emulation? And if so, what program are you using and what specific hardware are you emulating? As always, thanks for watching and supporting the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.